Yeah, I did not, but I did, I just made it. Yes. Oh, that's amazing. Oh, sorry. Yeah. That's a good treat. Oh, wonderful.
Where are you from? Like,
I'm originally from the Series. It's not at all. Well, California or not, but.
Hi, it's Karen, I'm Tiger too.
Remember in class.
So.
I know. It's the
turn on the mics, that's very important. Yeah. Hi, my name is Liz Hume, and I'm the Senior Director at the Alliance for Peacebuilding, and I want to welcome everybody here to talk about these really important issues, and I thank you. I mean, the attendance is amazing, and to talk about these issues. We have an amazing panelists, and I also just want to welcome you to our new offices. I don't know if people are familiar with the Alliance for Peacebuilding. We're the institutional home for the peacebuilding organizations, and we're thrilled that you can be here. Kim Weichel is going to be moderating this panel. She has so much experience in the peacebuilding field, working on women's issues. As the CEO by Piece, you're now a consultant. So I'd just like to say thank you again for coming. We're so thrilled that everyone's here, and I will let you take it away.
Oh. Well, thank you, Liz, and welcome everybody, both in the room and on live stream. As Liz said, my name is Kim Weichel, and I wear about 4 hats today that link all the co-sponsors. I'm CEO of an NGO called Peace by Peace. I'm on the advisory council of the UN Association of the National Capital Area. I chair the Women in Peacebuilding Affinity group for the Alliance for Peacebuilding, and I'm a consultant with UN Women. I also want to thank the Alliance for hosting it. This is really gorgeous space. It's their new offices. And I want to thank our co-sponsors, the UN Association of the National Capital Area, and let's see if I can get it right, the National Capital Chapter of the U.S. National Committee for UN Women. Our representative, CeCe Cole, isn't quite here yet, so we hope she slips in during the course of our conversation. So today we're focused on highlights from the Commission on the Status of Women, and I wanted to give an overview. CSW has been going now, it's its 60th year. It's always held in March for 2 weeks in conjunction with International Women's Day, which is March 8th, and Women's History Month in March. The commission is composed of gender advisors and delegations from every country that come together every year over a 2-week period to discuss their progress in terms of gender equality and women's empowerment over the previous year. So they come, they meet at the UN, they discuss their country reports, they pass resolutions, and they also work on what's called a concrete document. Rather an outcome document. It's supposed to be concrete as well. And they're setting standards, they're setting priorities and goals for the next year that then they would evaluate next year. So they work on this outcome document. It is eventually submitted to ECOSOC, which is a UN entity or UN agency, and therefore it's legally binding. In the last couple of years, NGO leaders have been able to give input to the outcome document. The good news there is that some of the NGOs can also monitor the progress of governments to make sure that they implement what their promises are. So there's a lot of meetings over 2 weeks within the UN. Now, simultaneously, there are thousands, and I think, some 6,000, I don't know, NGO leaders from all over the world that come to New York at the same time. How everyone affords to stay in New York and then from all over, I have no idea. It's amazing. It's just thrilling to be with so many passionate, committed women. And some men, but mostly women. So a lot of the NGO sessions take place across the street at what's called the Church Center, as well as a few other buildings. There are sessions 8:30, 10:30, 12:30, 2:30, 4:30, and 6:30 every day, and about 6 to 8 simultaneous sessions to give you just a mix or an idea of how much is going on at CSW. So some people, like us in the panel, had credentials to go into the UN. So some NGOs have what's called ECOSOC accreditation, which they have had to get previously, and then each organization is given a certain number of tickets. So for example, the UN Association of the United States is given 20 tickets. I think there were 150 applications, people wanting those 20 tickets. So it's not easy to get, but it's important to have to be able to get in to observe the official delegations going on in the UN. So again, the picture is dialogues in the UN and then conversations at the Church Center and at other buildings around the city. So the theme this year, as the 60th, focused on the 2030 agenda and linking sustainable development to women's empowerment. So they're called the Global Goals for Sustainable Development, or the Sustainable Development Goals, and they're SDGs for short, which are set universal goals, targets, and indicators for UN member nations to adhere to, for the next 15 years, to set guidelines and priorities for the next 15 years, thus 2030. And they add on and build upon the 8 Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs, that just concluded last year. So this is now a new 15-year priorities from January through to 2030. So of the 17 SDGs, number 5 is on gender equality and women's empowerment, but gender cuts through all 17 goals. So for example, the first one is about alleviating poverty everywhere in all forms. And of course, women are most affected by poverty, especially the extreme poverty. Also, goal 16, which we're thrilled that they included this year, which focuses on creating peaceful and inclusive societies. We know that women are the leaders at the grassroots, creating peace in their communities, but unfortunately not at the peace tables and not as mediators and not as negotiators. And if we really want sustainable peace, we need more women at that level. So every one of the goals affects women. And the Commission acknowledged, and certainly we know, that there won't be progress on the SDGs if there is not gender equality and women's empowerment. So a number of the sessions, both the NGO and the UN, of course, focused on the variety of these 17 goals and including gender in all of them. So to try and summarize this extraordinary plethora of programs is virtually impossible. It's like a smorgasbord of activities. So that's why we have a panel, and each of us will be sharing from our perspective. What I wanted to do was just set some what I saw as cross-cutting themes, and then turn it to the panels for them to share their stories. So there were many sessions, not surprisingly, on violence against women, on domestic violence, on human trafficking of women and girls, of rape as a weapon of war, and a variety of other aspects of gender-based violence. We know, of course, the extraordinary cost, both to the individual and society. They mentioned that in 2014, the cost of violence against women was estimated around 13% of global GDP, or some $14 trillion. I mean, enormous costs. And a number of programs focused on specific initiatives with training police, training judges, educating women as to their rights, providing more services, a variety of ways to combat this insidious, one of the most egregious human rights violations of our time. They launched, and I attended the launch of the Gender-Based Violence Emergency Response and Protection Initiative, which is a partnership between some US government agencies and NGOs and private sector. A number of sessions focused on women's economic empowerment. There were discussions about educational programs, training programs, a lot of entrepreneurial kinds of activities and programs to encourage and train women to be able to step more fully and earn an income and create their own work. There was a recent McKinsey report that says that advancing women's economic equality could add $12 trillion to global GDP by 2025. So we know that this is not just important for women, it's important for societies. Then there were a number of sessions on women in power and decision-making, where there are now some 12 female heads of or presidents and 6 female prime ministers globally, which is a small percentage of the 196 countries. But still, it's gaining traction. And in 2015, there was an average of 25% female representatives in parliament. And I think in the US, we're at about 20%. And only 4% of CEOs of Fortune 500 companies are women. Then there were a number of other sessions, so I'll just briefly touch on them. Advancing women's health, the importance of having trained civilian unarmed peacekeepers in conflict areas. Sessions on poverty eradication programs, sessions on interfaith initiatives to build peace. There were various sessions on gender and countering violent extremism, which of course is a very complex issue. And then one that I found interesting and concerning is the shrinking of space for civil society in a number of countries. And we heard a number of examples where government uses fighting terrorism as a guise to crack down on civil society and as a way to legitimize their efforts. And so we heard about arrests and targeting civil society. And of course, this is often where the women are, is running civil society organizations. And after all, civil society helps to keep governments accountable. So it's a deeply concerning trend. Then there were regionally focused programs on efforts in Africa, in the MENA region, in Islamic countries. There was a riveting program with Syrian women about what's going on in Syria, and then so much more. So that just gives you an overview. But the best part for me is connecting with extraordinarily passionate, committed women that you meet in the hallways and around the programs, such as our panel. So I'm delighted to introduce our panelists, and I'm thrilled that Manaz Afkami could be here today. She's founder and president of Women's Learning Partnership based in Bethesda. She's executive director of the Foundation for Iranian Studies, and she's former minister for women's affairs in Iran. She founded the Association of Iranian University Women and served as Secretary General of the Women's Organization of Iran prior to the Islamic Revolution. Manaz has been a leading advocate of women's rights for more than 3 decades. She helped create the International Research and Training Institute for the Advancement of Women, or UNSTRA as it's called, and she is a published author of a number of books. So welcome, Manaz.
Thank you, Kim. Let's see. Thank you very much for this generous introduction, and thanks everybody for being here. About time to go home. Cocktail hour, I suppose. But as a Muslim, you see, I'm very interested, very interested in that hour. But just to follow on what Kim was describing about this year's theme at the CSW, and just to put in perspective the differences between the Millennium Development Goals, the 8 goals that we had for 15 years, starting in the year 2000, and what has come about, which is a much more comprehensive, much more detailed agreement. One of the things to realize is 149 governments came together and worked for 2 years along with NGOs and along with private sector and experts and scholars to create this based on the challenges faced on the ground and the potential that we have for change. As Kim mentioned, the number of items that are the goals that are presented in the Sustainable Development Goals are not specifically mentioned in this one on women, but again, the reach of them very much includes women. And I think that's a very important development. In Beijing, we had the 4th World Conference on Women. We had a platform for action which mentioned 12 areas of concern. So when you look to the 17 goals of the SDGs, you see that the most important ones, except the last few in the areas of concern of the Beijing platform, which are more about bringing attention to women's issues, consciousness raising, and media, the rest are almost identical with the most important, the first 5 or 6 goals in the Sustainable Development Goals, which means poverty, education, health, just access to justice, and so forth, and sustainable climate and sustainable work with the environment. And others that are all very much of concern to every human being. Now, the reason that for me personally and for my organization is very important is that for several years, and let me just explain that Women's Learning Partnership is not one organization, it's actually 20 organizations. There are 20 independent autonomous organizations on 4 regions of the world, largely Muslim majority countries, because that's where there's a lot of challenges at the present time, but cross-faith, cross-ethnic, cross-race, and so forth. And we work together constantly on a daily basis. One of the blessings of technology. It doesn't always work. It doesn't always work in different places on Earth, but when it works, it really makes it possible for us to be in constant communication. And we gather together here in Washington once a year for a week to study the state of the world and also to plan for the next year in relation to the state of the world we see. Now, how are we thinking of the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals? Before, when we were at Beijing, we were talking about, we want, if we have 30% representation of women in decision making, this is the percentage that begins to make a difference. It's really the important number. From then on, you begin to make a difference. Then we graduated from that a little bit later and said, by the time of MDGs, we said 50%. And we still have the goal of 50-50 as the mission of a lot of organizations. What we have been thinking about is that there is enough consciousness raised around the globe, enough research has been done, enough organizing has been done, that people almost everywhere, I'm not talking about the crazies, and they're a very small group, but people almost everywhere are conscious of the fact that without 50% of the population, the other 50% can't do what it wants to or what it needs to do. It's a very simple thing. You would imagine anybody would figure it out much earlier, but it's taken all that time. And finally, we know that the 50% can be put in the background. So, however, we have reached a degree of consciousness and awareness and shown ourselves in so many fields that now we really have to think for the entire 100%. We have to show ways, not just for women, but for everybody. We have to create a vision with the other 50%, because we certainly are smart enough to know, and the gentlemen present, of course, are also smart enough to know. I'm talking about others who might not be, but we're all smart enough to know that we have to work together to think about the entire 100%. So what the SDGs does is it brings out not women need to be more this, women need to be more that, which of course they have to be, but that there are issues that the human race is facing right now. And those issues are vital, not only to the survival of this nation, this group or the other, but to the entire earth and the entire population of the earth. So we have to stop kidding around. We have to work together and try to find solutions. And of course, the SDGs are very important, not in the sense only that they have identified, studied, and brought out these issues in detail, but that they have national strategies, regional strategies, and international strategies of how to go about these things. And every one of them includes working together in partnership, collaboratively to do this. And also, it has a whole set of reporting and reviewing, so that regularly countries at the local level, at the national, regional, and international level review these and to see where have we gotten and how far we have gone. So for the next 15 years, this is the sort of a plan, a detailed plan that should allow us, and since 149 countries have gotten together to do this, and thousands of NGOs, as Kim mentioned, have helped all along to do this, then we really don't have much of an excuse. And another thing that we know is that for the first time in human history, when we talk about hunger, poverty being completely eliminated, for the first time in history, the human race has moved to a place scientifically where it isn't a problem. We can do it. We can do it. If we don't choose to do it, if we spend billions and billions of money, and God knows how many young men and women's resources and lives and bodily integrity in order to do things which end up where we all know. Instead of that, if we did a fraction of that and focused it, we could have healthcare for everybody, not just in the United States, across the world. We could have food for everybody. We have it, it's there. We just need to reach it. The only problem that we're facing here is that governments, as we have known it, structures as we have gotten used to, are no longer capable of doing what they're supposed to do partly because of this fantastic globalization, which has horrible stuff and very good stuff. The good stuff is we can share, we can communicate without cost almost immediately. We can share knowledge, we can share skills, we can share resources instantaneously. The downside of it is that everybody is in this thing together and they don't quite see it. If there is a disease, it's one step, one touch, one breath away from everybody else. Can't be contained. If there is any kind of a violence, it spreads and spreads and spreads all over. Anything that happens to the climate has the same effect as well. So governments are not ready to deal with that, and they don't know how to deal with it. They were pathetic enough without the 50% trying to do it for their own locality. They certainly can't deal with all of this that's happened. Look at the refugee situation that we are facing, which is threatening to completely destroy Europe and the European Union. When I say destroy Europe, I mean when Europe's outstanding values, such as freedom, such as openness, such as liberty, when these things are threatened and practices are not allowed, we will, of course, this is something that is a product. It is a product of the changes that have happened and the interconnectedness of the economies of everything, actually, everything that we all experience. So what we need really is some sort of governance that can handle these kinds of issues that we face. The issue of security, for instance, is no longer local, it's no longer national, it is international, and it takes everybody working together to deal about it. So if each government goes and spies on every one of their citizens, each government puts in prison everybody that looks suspicious or different, each government puts people behind bars without trial, that can happen to everybody, but it doesn't solve anything. If we want to do something about it, we're in this thing together. And so the only entity that could possibly be a solution is what we founded in this country. The United States was at the forefront of the creation of the United Nations. Without the United States, there would be no United Nations, not then, and I doubt if anytime soon afterwards. Why did it come about? Because of the world wars, because of the savagery and loss and destruction and all of the misery that happened during that war. So we learned, stepped back, said, let's do something about it. So the United Nations is there for us, but the problem is that it is inefficient, it's bureaucratic, it's not of the 21st century, it's not a product of the communications revolution and all of the things that we're facing, and also the governments are not giving it the support it needs. And the other thing is that the United States, again, has an extraordinarily important role here, because the United States, both in terms of financially and in every other turn, should be at the forefront of supporting the United Nations and supporting its changes. One of the things that has happened, however, is that, as we well know, the United States government, as such, cannot be pushed one way or the other unless there is a certain level of awareness in the public of the importance of this. And that is not happening. I don't know if you have tried this or not. I know that I've seen university students. You ask them, what is CEDAW? They have no idea. You ask them, what is the World Conference on Population? They have no idea. You ask them, what is the Economic and Social Council? They have no idea. They don't know the United Nations. They don't know what it does. They don't know what good it is. Everybody else around the world comes or dies to come to the United Nations to exchange with the others and to use that platform. The United States is almost absent from that scene, and the public has no idea. That's why these organizations who deal with the United Nations and its place in the United States are so important, and we all should pay attention to that. I'm sorry, I'm awfully passionate about this topic.
It doesn't show.
And also, the thing is that I'm so worried about the fact that we're building and building and building these arms and these bombs and these things which are of another time, if ever there was a use for them. It is not of today. And unless we direct that kind of a budget and that kind of a support to something else, the only thing we can do with those bombs, 8,000 of them, one of them could destroy an entire continent. Why do we need 8,000 of them? If we make those, the use of it in the end is what? Annihilation. If they're very successful, the annihilation of the earth itself, you see. So we have to wake up and start taking responsibility. And women, I think, are at the forefront of that. And they are the ones who should take that. I'm going to take advantage of the offer that was given to me to talk about what we did at CSW, that is Women's Learning Partnership. We really brought so much awareness. You can't believe it. We actually blew the top of the ceiling that keeps information away from the people of the United States and elsewhere. We did marvelous stuff, but so did thousands of other organizations, and I think it makes a difference. When they go home and they share, it makes a huge difference. Our particular focus, the 20 organizations that were there, and someone mentioned how, you did, Kevin, how do people get money to come there? Well, we brought our partners there, or many of them, because we connect our work really at CSW to other pieces of the work that we do. For instance, we had a one-day conference at the New School for Social Research in New York, and that was focused on the family laws. And family laws, of course, is a term that is used for Muslim majority countries who have specific laws for the family. The issue is that every other law that exists in these countries, for instance, the Constitution of Iran before the Islamic Republic was copied from Belgium. Egypt is copied from some other European country. So these are very, egalitarian and fine. Other laws to deal with commerce, with banking, with agriculture, with whatever, they're modern laws. When it comes to women, however, you have to go back to Sharia and see what somebody said 1,400 years ago, and then try to see how well you can follow that. And there's also direct, pronouncements about those things ongoing that women have to deal with. Everything else is handled by civic law. The laws regarding family are handled by mullahs, and that has, as you might imagine, its own problems. So, but it's not only Muslim majority countries. Everywhere there are laws that have to do with the place of a woman in the family that are discriminatory. In this country, we still don't have maternity leave that is supported by the government, by legislation. And somebody wants to give maternity leave, they do. If they don't want to give it, they don't. And how are you going to have a baby? You're on your own, So we don't have childcare, which has any support from the government, which is ridiculous. If you want women to work, which they have to work, somebody's got to do something about the kids, and it seems, nobody pays attention. And what's worse is women don't pay attention. So in any case, what brought us to that particular university during CSW was because we wanted to create a global campaign for reform of discriminatory laws in the family, related to the family, whether they're traditional laws, whether they're written, whether they're oral, whether they're Sharia, whether they're just part of the legislation having to do with one thing or another. It doesn't matter. The role of the woman in the family. Why? Because no matter who you get to be. I was a minister in Iran. I was the second minister of women in the world after François Giroud in France. So you think that's a pretty powerful position, especially since nobody knew what that was, so, because it was brand new. So, I never forget that when I first went on you'll forgive me my anecdotes since we don't have CeCe here. We can. So, when I first went to England, at my first official meeting, I was introduced to Princess Margaret, Minister of State for Women's Affairs. And she said, "Oh, my dear, how do you manage women's affairs?" And it was really a blow because I said, "Oh my God, is that what I'm doing?" And and I've been trying to manage women's affairs for years now, for about 3 decades and over, and it's very difficult. I tell you, it's not an easy job. But anyway, even when I was a minister and I had international recognition and what else, if I wanted to travel to attend CSW, I would need my husband's permission. If my husband wasn't around, my kid or my brother or some man had to give me permission. Benazir Bhutto had to get her husband's permission to come outside. So this is absurd, it's really something that has to be dealt with. But even then, even in terms of the universality of it, unless a woman has rights to her personality, to her identity, to her citizenship, nationality, can pass her nationality to others, can decide where to go, travel without permission, have a job without permission, open an account for a child, which in the United States until the 1980s, if you open an account for a child, your own child, put money in it, you couldn't withdraw without a husband's permission. Not everywhere, but in most of the country. So these things are very significant. So we brought that to a one-day conference at CSW. We had a parallel event on case studies of this sort, another one in the NGO. So we tried to sort of connect academia, the NGOs, and the government. And inside the UN, because we have consultative status with the Economic and Social Council, we were able to also bring sessions inside the United Nations where some of our people discussed the issue of ISIS and radicalism, and tried to point out that this is not something that can be handled by carpet bombing, by destruction, by wars, because they don't care if somebody kills them. They actually do it themselves very fancily. They could, put something around themselves with a bomb inside and they go and blow themselves up. So they're not all that worried about dying. And they are very, very happy when somebody goes and kills a lot of them, because that will bring them new members. That's their way of getting new members. That's why they blow themselves up. So that's a really silly thing to go and try to kill them, because that doesn't solve the problem. What we need is education. It's slow, it's time consuming, it's troublesome, but everything else that means anything has the same process to go through. So we had several other sessions of that sort, but I'll end with the one session that I think was really very special, and that was a session of young poets from around the world, young women poets, no, 2 men and three women, who spoke about human rights around the world in poems, which they acted out. And this was the first time, I think, that type of expression, saying things in poetry, was done at the United Nations, so far as I know, in a presentation of that sort. So it met with a lot of positive response. So we're integrating poetry into our activities and hoping that maybe the things that cannot be reached by emotion and rhetoric can be reached by poetry. So the good news then from all of that is that we have reached a place where we realize that the 100% of humanity has to work together. I don't know whether Gloria was kidding or whether she was serious when she said a woman needs a man as a fish needs a bicycle. I think she was kidding. But this was for a long time the slogan, we don't need men, does a fish need a bicycle? So now this fish definitely needs a bicycle. And I think there's a whole lot of other fish in this room who also need bicycles. And so we are working together, and we're working with men, and we have a blueprint, and we have commitments. We have to make sure that they are real and that they are followed up, and there's enough pressure behind these sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Thanks, Manaz, for your passion and for your metaphors and for sharing. And yes, at CSW, there were some films shown. There was some music, there's some poetry, and so that's important to incorporate the arts, I think, into the sharing, because a lot of it's pretty heavy conversation, and it can get pretty intense, so it's nice to break that up with the creativity. So I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Karen Mulhauser. Karen's been a long-time advocate and champion of women's rights. She's also sort of Miss UN ambassador. I mean, she's held many hats at the UN Association of the National Capital Area, and she's currently chair of the UN Association of the United States of America. Karen founded Mulhauser and Associates in 1988, which is a small progressive management and public affairs consulting firm. So welcome, Karen.
Thank you very much, Kim, and thank you, Manaz. You've set the stage for some of my comments. I think I'll start with your assessment, accurate as it is, that there's not enough awareness in this country about the United Nations. And that is the reason that the United Nations Association was founded around the time that the UN was founded, to educate people in this country. And there are 100 other UNAs around the world in other countries, to educate them about the importance of the United Nations. And here in this country, it's to educate people, and it's just so obvious, like so much that Manaz said, that we cannot solve world problems by ourselves. I mean, we all have to work together. And if, despite the problems with the UN, because it's not perfect, if it didn't exist, we'd have to create it as a place, a forum for countries to come together and solve global problems together. Our boundaries don't stop disease or war or climate or other health issues. We have to work together to solve these problems. And there is a strong force in this country that is saying, we don't want to be part of the United Nations because we would lose our sovereignty. We don't want Cameroon telling us what to do. And that is ridiculous because decisions are made collectively by the countries that are member states of the United Nations. And the member states, as Manaz said, have passed the Sustainable Development Goals, these 17 goals that Kim referred to and outlined. And for the 2 years leading up to last fall, when the UN nations defined the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 global goals that we have been talking about, the UNA and its 150 chapters around the country convened almost 200 meetings, community meetings, for its UNA members as well as partner organizations and at the local community level to consider the possible goals. And some of you may have participated in a global survey called The World We Want to help prioritize the goals. One of the things that we found, and we asked the participants in these meetings to prioritize the goals, was that the US people in our meetings ranked gender equality and governance, this is goal 5 and goal 16, as among the top 3 choices. So the process of talking about these issues highlighted among our members and our partner organizations the importance of gender equality and the importance of governance and security, Goal 16. So we do believe that we have a whole lot more educating to do. We are at the United Nations Association doing a great deal to reach out to younger people. When I was asked if I would chair the United Nations Association nationally, I said, only if you can promise that I will never, ever, ever again be the youngest person in the room. And if you'll let me work on gender issues. And if we do more advocacy to support the United Nations. So they said, good, that's a good agenda. And I'm just completing my last year as the chair of the United Nations Association USA and have found it to be a very important forum. I will continue to be involved. And it did allow me to be one of the delegates to go to the Commission on the Status of Women. I've gone before in previous years. And when I went last year, March of 2015, I was on a panel that was talking about a relatively new initiative called Cities for CEDAW. At CSW the previous year in 2014, there was an initiative that was announced saying because, oh, and Manaz said a lot of people don't know what CEDAW is. It is the Women's Treaty. Some people call it that because it's easier to say that than the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So that's why a lot of people don't know what CEDAW means. It took me a while to remember that sequence of words. But it is a treaty that the United Nations General Assembly passed in 1979. President Carter signed it the next year. Some of you weren't born when President Carter was signing this in 1980. The United States is one of the 6 countries that has not ratified it. That doesn't mean that all the countries that have ratified it are implementing it, because there are still girls that are married at the age 10, 11, or 12. There are still girls that are not able to have an education. There are a lot of examples of gender inequality in the countries that have ratified CEDAW. But I was on a panel in 2015 on CEDAW. It was the first public panel to talk about cities for CEDAW, where if our federal government isn't going to ratify it, we can take it to the local municipal level, to our mayors and our city council members, and have local laws passed that would implement the principles of CEDAW. So there are now several cities that are working on this concept. A number of people came up to me, this was in 2015 afterwards, because the room was full of people from all over the world. And they said, we want to do this in our country. And I said, well, you've already ratified. And they said, yes, but it's not being implemented. One of our UNANCA members, Steve Mosley, who's done a lot of thinking and helping us understand the Sustainable Development Goals, went to the World Conference of UNA groups last fall, and a resolution that UNANCA or UNAUSA introduced was unanimously approved, and I have a copy of it here if anyone would like it, to for other UNAs to take this idea of gender equality, gender parity to the local level and have municipal governments implement it. So I went to every CSW panel I could this year on the issue of Cities for CEDAW, and we are working to get it a hearing and to have it passed in Washington, D.C., and we can talk about that if there's time. There was one panel on the 14th of March that had people from different cities that have either already implemented or passed CEDAW. or are in the process of bringing it together. And so there was a chance for them to share ideas on how to bring this to the local community, how to engage their partner organizations and the citizens of those cities and towns in understanding what it means to have gender parity. And so what's involved in this is that a city, if it passes a CEDAW law, would do a gender audit, look at different agencies and find out if men are treated the same as women, if boys are treated the same as girls, and if they're not, then they should pass laws to correct those inequities. So the first city that did this was in San Francisco, and I think Kim was living in San Francisco at that time.
Yes, yay, San Francisco.
You can count on the left coast to do
Yes.
something like that. But Berkeley and Los Angeles and other cities have also passed ordinances at this time. And so another one of the meetings that I went to was actually hosted at the UNA offices in New York, a couple of blocks from the UN, brought together people who were in New York for CSW to share their ideas, to learn from each other, to hear what other cities are doing and how they're being successful. And so a new sort of a nationwide network is emerging, oftentimes with UNA people, but sometimes these initiatives are started by other organizations. And UNA USA is in the process of raising some money in order to expand this effort nationwide through our chapters. We have now 36 campus chapters around the country. That was another one of my criteria. You know, I'm not going to be the youngest person in the room, and I haven't been since then. And so it's important that we involve young people in understanding not only the work of UN, but to advocate for reform of the UN where it needs reform, and to advocate for funding. As Manaz said, we are a rich country, and we need to pay our fair share and pay it on time in order to help the United Nations. There was another meeting on the 17th dealing with CEDAW issues, and that was on CEDAW is going international, and so it was convened by the CSW NGO community, and again, there was some sharing of how UNA and other organizations are bringing this to the international level, because it's a good model for other treaties. The U.S. has been negligent in ratifying the Convention on the Rights of the Child, another human rights treaty, and we have not yet ratified the Treaty on the Rights of the Disabled, even though it was written based on our own laws. So that whole sovereignty issue, but we would lose our sovereignty if we ratify UN treaties, is nonsense. But we're not going to be able to be ratifying these treaties until we build the constituency of support for what the UN is doing. And that's the mission of the United Nations Association. A final meeting that I went to, I went to several other meetings. Kim referred to the McKinsey report that if we did have true gender parity in the world, it would generate $12 trillion. This McKinsey report was, they're in the process, maybe in a week or 2 weeks, they're going to be releasing the US data. So if we had gender parity in the United States, how much we would be saving or generating in terms of income. And we had, the United Nations Association had a side event. For those of you who have not been to these before, the side events are the events that are in UN headquarters and hosted by one of the UN missions. And the parallel events are the bazillion of events that happen outside of the UN that are sponsored and hosted by NGOs. So UNA partnered with the United Arab Emirates, and McKinsey put out this report, and the Business Council of the United Nations, and BNY Mellon, a partner of the UNA, to have a side event in the UN. And it was called Gender, Justice, Sustainable Development. The panelists included the head of UN Women, and one of the people who wrote this report, and the role that I was asked to talk about was how the Sustainable Development Goals are universal. And one of the changes between how the MDGs were drafted behind closed doors and how the SDGs, the 2030 agenda, was drafted in a much more inclusive and over a long period of time, and involved anyone who wanted to fill in that World We Want survey. And the other strong difference is the universal nature of it. It applies to us here in the United States as well as to the less developed countries. So the work that UNA chapters are doing around the country involve community partners, so that we are looking at our own inequalities and poverty elimination that's necessary, and the disparity in education and health and all of those other 17 global goals. And so it's, as we continue to do education at the local level through our chapters, it's going to reinforce not only how the goals impact in our own communities, but the importance of the United Nations. For all of the reasons I'm not going to repeat, if we don't do this, we're not going to have a planet. And we have to. The reason they're called the Sustainable Development Goals, that unless we achieve all of these goals, the way we are living now on the planet is not sustainable. So it's a highly important agenda. One of the themes that I heard in the myriad sessions that I went to is that we do need more men. So I really want to thank the men who are here, that we're not going to get gender equality until the men also say, yes, it makes sense that 50% of the population has the same rights and opportunities as the other 50%. And that came up in a number of the sessions that I attended. One of the really nifty things, if you bring an extra suitcase, is that you do pick up a lot of very interesting materials. And another session that I went to related to the Sustainable Development Goals produced this document. You can sign up to borrow it if you'd like. It's Every Woman, Every Child, but these materials are also available online if you're interested. One of the things that the delegates, the UNA delegates to the CSW were asked to do was to write blogs. I finally did get the address for the blogs.
So yes, we wrote daily blogs about highlights and summaries from the core sessions. And so we thought we'd share that with you, because that way you could see more and more detailed reports than we can give here.
Yeah, and I don't know if we have everyone's email addresses. This is a long, I think we probably do. So it would probably be easier for me to send it out to you, because for me to read it off to you is, it will take up the rest of our time, because it's a long email address, URL. So if we do not have your email address, so we will send it out after today, and I'll also send out links to some of these other materials, because the blogs that were written by the UNA delegates give much more detail. And if you're truly interested in this, it's almost like being there to read their blogs. And they're also posted on the UNA Women Facebook page. In addition to our 150 chapters around the country, we have over 22,000 members. And we have a listserv that we call UNA Women, which supports, it's individuals around the country that support the UN Women agenda. And so there's communication on that listserv about CSW and a number of other activities. So we will send links to all of that so that you can get every bit as much information as you want.
Well, thank you, Karen. And
Some of the sessions were live streamed. I don't know if they still have them online, but where you can actually watch them.
Yes, a lot of them are. I mean, especially the ones that were in headquarters.
Yes.
So I can send you the link to the panel that I was on.
Well, and as Karen says, you always leave with a ream of paperwork and
Right.
reports. So there's a lot of material, and it's very intensive. You learn tremendous amount. But again, it's the engagement with the people and sharing the joint commitment and passion that's so wonderful. Looks like our third speaker, CeCe Cole, didn't make it. So I know a few of you attended CSW, so we can have this time now for questions if you have, or a few shares about highlights that you experienced from CSW. So we'll open it up. See who'd like to, yes, please. Oh, yes, Ursula, do we want a microphone?
Here.
Okay.
Pass this around.
That'll work.
Sure. Okay. Kent Davis Packard from Women's Learning Partnership. I understand that, and I was at CSW, and most of the meetings were primarily attended by the NGO community, although the purpose is to bring awareness of women's issues to government.
Mhm.
So were you pleased with the engagement that occurred this year at CSW 60 compared to other years, the engagement and communication that the NGOs had with governments?
Mhm. Manaz, do you want to take that?
Okay.
You've got
No,
this.
here, you can use
Okay.
this one. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, this is something that a problem we've had all along, all these years, even at the wonderful UN conferences, which have given all of us so much, that actually have been the reason why so many NGOs have been created. Just to mention the change, in Mexico, we had 800 NGOs. At Beijing, we have 34,000. And then if you count now, it's hundreds and hundreds of thousands. So the conferences were very good, but the connection, what Kent mentioned, is very important, that the interaction between governments and NGOs is very little. But what happens is that the NGOs pass a lot of information to each other, which is tremendously important. And also they learn how to advocate to their own governments. So what happens is when the delegates come to the United Nations, they already have been indoctrinated, brainwashed, or maybe we should say their consciousness has been elevated. So when they come, they act differently than they would otherwise. For instance, of course, these documents that are presented, such as the CEDAW treaty, or any of the ones, including the Human Rights Declaration, the very first one in 1948, all of these have really been written by governments. So if the people are conscious and pressure their governments, the government delegates will do what they're supposed to do. So even though there is no on-site interaction very much, nevertheless, NGOs learn from each other, go back home, have plans to influence, and that influence comes back in the next decision making.
And that's the advocacy part of UNA. If you want to be involved in advocacy efforts, even though you may be living in DC, which is sort of a colony instead of a state, there are ways that we can be involved in advocacy so that we let our government know, and this is, as Manal says, this happens as other NGOs go back to their own countries. We need to let our governments know that this is important to us, that we are citizens of a global community. And that the United Nations is the forum where we can live those lives together.
And I want to add that a lot of the government sessions are closed. So in the UN, so you can't necessarily get in. The ones that you can get in are often, their speeches. They're, to be honest with you, their country reports. They're not very interesting to listen to, but they don't really have an opportunity to give input or feedback. So as they both said, the real work is at going back at the local level and ensuring accountability. for progress. But yes, there is some interaction. I wish there was more. And now we have NGOs finally giving input into this outcome document, which is a first time in the last couple of years. Other questions or comments or shares from CSW? Yes.
I'm not sure if I understood right, but did you say that the UAE was one of the co-sponsors?
Of the program, of a specific
United
program.
Arab Emirates or?
Yes.
Different, really? So that was very interesting to me on women because they're not known for their.
Well, but the ambassador to the UN is a woman, and I met her and her assistant, and
Just reiterating on that, called it the Clinton phenomenon. When she became Secretary of State, a lot of countries sent female ambassadors. For example, Jordan, based in it's a huge influx. So it's really making sure that they are not just puppets and not
Yes.
just sustenance.
Yes.
You know, it's a big issue.
Yeah.
Do you think they've showed willingness to change things?
it's the beginning of a relationship where we can have those conversations. And if somebody has to send me to Dubai, it's okay.
Yeah.
And it sounds great. That's how you do it.
Yeah.
They spend a lot of money. The Gulf states spend a huge amount of money in the United States, creating all sorts of centers and scholarly endeavors and so forth. But there's one type of behavior outside and then another type of behavior inside.
Right.
And of course, since huge money is there,
And
they
one,
get a lot of what they want.
one of the main themes and purposes for this session that the United Arab Emirates hosted for us is the importance of forging relationships between the civil society in all countries, their governments, and the private sector. And that's why the McKinsey report was so valuable, that in the context of gender equality, if we have that, then governments are going to do better, people are going to do better, and businesses will do better.
Great. Other questions or shares?
Essentially, you know, with the election cycle
Do
and
we need a
2016 election cycle here in the United States, and under the Bush administration, you know, Ambassador Bolton said get rid of a couple floors of the UN, and wasn't a really big supporter of it. So, how do we get the public aware of these things that it really matters to us?
well,
Well, that's where the value of the UN Association, right?
well,
Karen?
the UN Association plus many other of our partner organizations. There, some at the national level, we have huge partners with the National Education Association. Another huge partner is Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority that has 900 chapters around the country. We're proud of our 150. And we just need to reach out, find, in any Venn diagram, that place where we overlap with another partner organization, and encourage them to join us in this education. This is an election year. One of the things that we're very aware of, Kim and I are on a group that's called the Civil Society Working Group for Women, Peace, and Security to support the National Action Plan for a 2000, Security Council Resolution 1325. And we only got our National Action Plan because of an executive order. The next administration could eliminate it. So there is an important relationship between citizens being aware of the issues and then voting for the people who support the issues. And so this is a very important election, and very tangibly for something like the Women, Peace, and Security National Action Plan, but also for UN funding, paying our dues, supporting the peacekeepers around the world, and so Elections matter.
I'll just add, since I've been involved with UN in different capacity for many years, I think those that criticize it most don't understand what it does. Every time there's a humanitarian disaster, which sadly there's many, from earthquakes to tsunamis, the UN is there immediately. It's amazing to me, the more I've learned about the breadth and depth of what the UN does, how essential it is. Now, it's certainly a bureaucratic institution, and yes, there are a lot of problems, and yes, they need to be fixed. But, it really is doing remarkable work, and that we rely on every day that we don't realize. And so I'd say a lot of the criticism usually comes from either people thinking the UN is telling them what to do, which is not the case, but it's really not understanding the amazing array of work, essential work that we rely on for whenever there's a disaster or a conflict. And so, I guess more education is what, is what's needed.
Yeah. And just to add to what Karen and Kim have said, the most important work of the UN in some ways is the agencies that are related, a part of it, like United Nations Population Fund, like UNESCO, like UNICEF. Those are the ones on a daily basis who are helping education, they're helping population control and many other issues like that. And then, of course, the peacekeeping function, which is, and the refugees, which of course is horrendous right now. But these agencies are the ones that are working on behalf of the whole world. And the very mention that was made of the United States worrying about its sovereignty, actually, the United States has a veto power in the Security Council. So whatever it doesn't like, it could very easily veto, and it often does. So there is no danger to that. It's a misunderstanding about what a united, a union of nations around the world means. Again, as was said here, if we didn't have one, we would definitely have to create it right now. So now what we have to do is make it work better, more efficiently, have more money, and that we have no other choice. No single country or single group of countries can do it. It has to be something that is shared globally, and it's the only place where all the nations get together to make decisions. Mm-hmm. And more NGOs are participating as well.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, Steve. Now, Steve was at CSW, so I don't know if you want to share a highlight.
Only for a day, so I can't tell us about the present. First of all, I want to thank you both, all the panelists, for relating this to U.S. common issues as well. I think the only way the public will change is if we can see ourselves within these goals. And CEDAW is a wonderful example of that. You cited family law examples. On the other hand, the last 15 years with the MDGs, only 8 to 10% of the American population had ever heard of them by after 15 years. Mm-hmm. That's after a great deal of advocacy. The question I wanted to ask about CSW, I was there just for a day, and there wasn't a single session about the potential of a woman becoming the Secretary General. And the election is this year. It's another election. It's going to occur more or less the same time and will happen. And for the first time, it's not being done behind closed doors. Mm-hmm. There is actually a slate of candidates. They're coming to the fore. They're not all selected, identified yet. And they're going to be sort of hearings, questions. It's the first time in the history of the United Nations. The candidates will be asked questions submitted by the public. NGOs have to submit them by yesterday, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Yeah, this week.
So I'm wondering, you who have been leaders at CSW, was there much discussion behind your doors or in the corridors about that? And what difference could that make if a woman became the head of the United Nations? I'd like to think a great deal of difference. Yeah. What do you think? And what do you think is the possibility?
Well, I think the possibility is quite high. And there's some fantastic women who are very qualified to do that. And yes, it does make a difference if a woman is there, not only as a symbolic thing, but I don't know, I get myself into trouble, but I honestly...
Go ahead, get in trouble.
Yeah. I was just going to say something about Saudi Arabia, which I usually do, but I'm not going to do it. But anyway, this business of a woman being, I mean, let's face it, women just are more inclined by their historical and traditional roles that they have played and possibly others, psychological, other issues, I don't know, they are more apt to be peaceful. I mean, they keep pointing to Margaret Thatcher and Golda Meir, but those women have had to put, for one thing, they were exceptionally, feisty to begin with, but they had to fit a masculine setup. But basically, women don't start wars. They don't. They're not as aggressive, and they haven't been brought up to be that way. You see, they have been brought up to play family with dolls and so forth, which is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all. Boys should do that too, instead of tanks and guns and whatever. But I think there is a tendency that women can bring characteristics that would complete, would add, just as what they have already brought. Just a quick thing. I look back at my own son, who has children now. The way he interacts with her little girl and little boy is something that is beautiful to behold. This wouldn't have been done 15 years ago, 20 years ago. This is something that the women's movement has brought to men, that now they can do this, and it's okay, that it's okay for them to bathe the child and hold it and all of that. It's a wonderful thing for men to be able to do that. And it's important for women to be able to be a commander-in-chief. But in general, the characteristics that women bring will be helpful. There will be fewer wars, I think.
I'd like to just build on that. And yes, I did have a number of conversations about this. So if there were not, I did not go to any official panels where they talked about it, but it was the buzz in a lot of the meetings that I was at. And just to build on what Manaz said, there is now documentation. And the reason that the Security Council passed Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security is that, in part, it is because when women are on the post-conflict peace negotiation tables, there is a more lasting peace. And the documentation is often described as, and this is, it's going to take a few more generations raising sons like yours and mine, but it is going to happen. But for the time being, more often than not, men will think of peace in the terms of power, like who has the most power at the end of the negotiation. And women will think about their grandchildren. They'll think about not the power angle of why there's peace, but how people interact. And so there is documentation now, just as there is documentation that when women reach parity, there will be more resources. I know we are running out of time, but
I'd like to speak to that one too.
But I also, but I want to, because I did mention CEDA. Okay. And I wanted to talk about that.
So, yes, there was buzz, and I did hear about it. There was a few people I know had concerns about a couple of the candidates. So it's not as if they're all, I'm sure they're good, but we'll see where the process goes. But I think it's important for the UN to also embody what it preaches. And because I do work with UN Women, I know that they haven't achieved parity yet at all levels in the UN. Mm-hmm. So there's some pressure, and there needs to be more pressure. That, of course, at the lowest levels, there's a majority of women. And so at the highest levels, at the Undersecretary General, there's been some backsliding, quite frankly, and I think that's been written about of late. And so I, as a consultant to UN Women, am sort of pushing UN Women to keep promoting at the secretariat level that they fully, so this would be a great, symbol, if not more than a symbol. But I've written a lot on what I call feminine leadership, which is basically the qualities that generally women bring, but also men can embody them. But it's the qualities of long-term thinking, of collaboration, of being inclusive, of sharing power rather than hoarding power, and a whole bunch of other characteristics that you've heard. So I think it would be, I think, a good move for the UN for a variety of reasons to find the right female candidate. So I hope that moves forward. So, but I just wanted to make sure, were there any other burning questions or shares before Karen has the last word? because we can continue over the little reception here to talk as well. And I'd love to hear your stories. So Karen,
Well,
please.
just because we did mention that we are doing a Cities for CEDAW here in DC, and the UNA National Capital Area actually includes all of Maryland. I'm sure most people who live in Maryland don't think of themselves as national capital area, the suburbs do, and Northern Virginia. But we're starting with a Cities for CEDAW, and Kim and I co-chair this initiative in DC. All council members have sponsored the legislation, but it's not going to pass until we have a hearing. And we're afraid there's not going to be a hearing anytime soon because the Judiciary Committee has a lot of other business. So we've been holding public forums. We held our first public forum that ended with an advocacy agenda on the sexual assault victims' rights that is be covered by CEDAW type legislation. The next one was on economic issues, the gender pay gap, which exists everywhere, including in Washington, D.C., as well as paid family leave for health issues or other issues. And then the next one, and I wanted to just point out Kristen Heck in the back, who's coordinating this out of the National Capital Area office, is on going to be on health issues, including the whole array of reproductive health and justice issues, as well as Washington, D.C. has the highest HIV/AIDS rate in the country. So that's another issue we're going to address, as well as other health issues. It's going to be in the first week of May, and you'll learn about it because we have your email. And if you live in DC, we give you ways to be in touch with your council members. If you don't, you can say you come to DC often, and women should be treated the same as men in DC. So we'll keep you as informed as you want to be.
Okay, last question. Yes.
I have a question regarding your agenda. What does the panel think about addressing age discrimination for women? Getting hired, securing a job, and sustaining a job through the ages.
Yeah.
And that's a very big problem regarding, especially since we're having baby boomers, we're having the population in the United States is growing older, and what can you, comments can you address about the age discrimination problem we have there's a disparity for women that as you get to a certain age, you start to actually lose your abilities to make income from 40s, 50s, 60s.
Yeah.
Well, let me just firstly say, of course, it's illegal, but it's overt or covert rather than overt, because they can't legally discriminate, but there'll be other excuses given as to why, and so, yes, that is a big challenge.
I was recently appointed to the DC Human Rights Commission, and age discrimination as well as race and gender and disabilities are topics that we deal with on the commission all the time. And so it is illegal. There are cases that are brought. It's not easy to solve that one though, because at age 30, I applied to medical schools and I was told I was too old. Well, it's a long time ago. Yeah. And they also said, and you may have another child, and why would we waste an education on you? So, it's been a problem for a long time. That was a paraphrase. I knew what they were saying. They didn't say that. Why would we waste an education on you? But
just to add to Karen's, I come from a different background altogether, from Iran, and I see here that there is such a worship of youth. It's nearly worship. It's not even a sentiment of positive thinking, but just youth worship. Just the word young seems to make people palpitate, although the young people themselves, I don't think feel like that, because I see they have so many
Take advantage
miseries,
of it, it doesn't last.
so much issues, so much pressure on them, so much insecurity applied to them. But the country as a whole has this youth fetish. In other countries, there is, in some ways, the opposite. That is, age brings supposedly wisdom. I wouldn't vouch for it, but that either. But it's supposed to bring wisdom. Experience is supposed to bring a certain amount of experiences that shared knowledge that comes through, or a mildness of manner that makes you think when you make decisions and so forth. So there are a lot of positions that nobody would think to give to a young person, because they would think it takes a different set of experiences to be able to hold those positions. So it is a problem both ways, in places where just being old sort of gives you authority. And then in places where this worship of young people makes it impossible for people who are perfectly willing and able and experienced to work, they get discriminated against. So balance, I think, would be a very good thing if we could do
If we could find a way to do it.
Yeah.
Well, if they can hire somebody who's 30 to do the same work, and we're used to a salary 3 times as much as the 30-year-old would take, then it's hard to make that case to the employers.
Well, let's continue this discussion over dessert. So I want to thank our panelists. Thank you for coming.